and welcome back to the channel. I am Connor Bromley, and today I am joined by Andrew Musgrove, who is of the black and white persuasion, as you can tell from his background. Andrew, how are you feeling ahead of the derby?
Yeah, nervous, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm one of those Newcastle fans who is longed for these derbies to return in the top flight. I'm maybe in the minority when I say that, but I'm looking forward to it. I guess if you ask me, come full time on Sunday, I might have a different answer for you.
Yeah, well, Andrew's from the Everything's Black and White podcast. I'll put the link in the description because I've been on his channel, so you can check that out and see what I've got to say about Sunderland, if you wish. I think, though, the first place to really start, Andrew, is with how important is this game to Newcastle United? Because I've seen some chatter online that maybe this game falls into a little bit of insignificance potentially because of the other things Newcastle have got going on right now. But where does this rank in terms of importance for the season for Newcastle fans? I mean, is this the most important game of the season so far, or are other games maybe higher in terms of a ranking?
I think it's hugely important, and those people on social media trying to downplay how important this game is, I think are lying to themselves. To be quite honest with you, it's hugely important in terms of what it means to the fan base, to the city, to the region. You don't want to lose a game to your nearest and dearest down the road, but also in terms of Newcastle United are still waiting for something to kickstart their season. Now, their form of late has been okay, but the performances have been particularly poor. Nothing to really write home about, and it just feels like it hasn't clicked for Newcastle United. So, in many ways, it's not really about the game in terms of that. It's about getting that next win on the road and trying to continue that momentum to climb the table. But certainly, so in terms of facing Sunderland, this is massive. I mean, the first derby in the top flight in 9 years, and it's absolutely huge and absolutely crucial that Newcastle United do not lose it.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously I think the last derby we played was 2016 in the Premier League. I think it was a 1-1 draw. If memory serves me right, I think Sunderland were winning and Newcastle got maybe a late goal. I think Mitrovic, scored it. We did obviously play that cup game though, which was actually only in 2024, which is weird. I mean, it was right at the start of 2024, but it was only last year. But that game, I think it's fair to say, Sunderland were not in a good place at the time. We finished 16th in the Championship that season. Newcastle were expected to win. Obviously, you get the bragging rights for that. I'm not taking them away from you, but I don't think it. Is it fair to say that didn't really feel like a proper derby in the sense that it was obvious Newcastle should have won that game and Sunderland are in such a bad place? This feels like both teams are actually, Sunderland are certainly doing well in the Premier League. It feels like both teams are in a good place going into it, which is probably the first time we can say that for a long time.
Yeah, that game, there was that expectation that Newcastle should win this game. They were in the top flight. Sunderland were in the Championship, and it was kind of a, don't want to say it was a given, but it would have been disastrous had Newcastle United lost that game. Whereas here, there's more riding on just the game. Like, that was 90 minutes of football through to the next round of the cup, and that was it. You go away, you never have to think about Sunderland again because they're in the level below. Whereas here, there's more riding on it than just 3 points. A win for Newcastle United propels them up the table, leapfrog Sunderland, and it could be that catalyst to get their season going. So as much as it's about Sunday, it's also about the bigger picture in terms of what it means, because you win on Sunday, you could then qualify for Europe come May on 3 points, and you look back and say, well, we got the 3 points against Sunderland, and that's what maybe made the difference.
In terms of, I want to talk about the Sunderland getting promoted, because again, you see when Sunderland get promoted, there's a lot of chatter from people on social media, and it's very much from the Newcastle side of things. In a way, we're happy that the derbies are back, but also Sunderland are probably going to be pretty bad, and therefore we've got a good chance to get 2 wins. Are you surprised at how Sunderland have done this season, and has your view changed of the derby? I mean, were you of the mindset when Sunderland went up that, right, this is good, we can probably get a good double against them and win both games, or were you of the mindset that it was always going to be tough because it's a derby? But how surprised, I suppose, are you with Sunderland's start to the season?
Very surprised that they've done as well as they have done. I think they're playing without fear in many ways, and that's no disrespect to the manager. I know he's very organised and disciplined, and clearly he has a plan, but I think they are playing a little bit without fear, which is absolutely fantastic, and you can see the benefits of that. And that never say die attitude's just been absolutely superb, and it has been I don't want to say it's been a joy to watch because of my allegiances to Newcastle, but if it was any other side, it's been a joy to watch. And actually, look, the story has been fantastic. And if they managed to maybe even do an Ipswich and qualify for Europe as they did under George Burley all those years ago, it will be a tremendous story. But in terms of looking at the derby when Sunderland were promoted, I never. My first thought wasn't, "Oh, this is an easy 6 points," because it's not. It's not at all. Form goes out the window. It's about who wants it more on the day. It's about the passion and the desire. You feel the influence of both sides in the ground. It's never guaranteed 3 points, even if on paper Newcastle do have a better squad and more world-class players. So when they got promoted, my first thought was, actually, I'm quite happy because I want the derbies back. But it wasn't, I want the derbies back because I think Newcastle are guaranteed 6 points. Not at all. For me, it's all about beating your local rivals when they're on the up, just as Newcastle United are on the up. And I've said this on my show and I've been getting pelters for it, but I genuinely would love to have Newcastle and Sunderland battling for the Premier League title. That for me would be brilliant. And then you can play those derby games and actually, you've not just beaten your rival because they're not as good as you in terms of the players and the setup, but they're at the very top of the game, and so are you. I mean, I always think back to Man City winning against QPR and winning the title in the last minute. We all remember the Aguero moments. But they didn't just win the Premier League title. They took it from the hands of their local rivals, Manchester United, and it must have been so much sweeter to do that. And that's kind of what I would love to see in the next decade, 15, 20 years. I know it's a dream more than an expectation, but I'm excited to have these back, but there's no given whatsoever about what's to happen on Sunday and what was to happen when you guys get promoted as well.
Well, let's talk about Newcastle and their start of the season because I watch, obviously when Newcastle are on the telly, I'll watch them. So I've seen them have a mix of results. I watched that Liverpool game at home, which was they were down to 10 men, but they played so well, ended up losing it in added time. I watched them against Arsenal where they lost a game later on, which maybe comes onto a theme you can maybe talk about with the late goals going in. But also away from home, I watched you at Everton the other week and you won that 4-1, a result that I don't think anyone really saw coming. But then you've dropped 2 stinkers against Brentford and West Ham as well away. So what have you made of Newcastle's start to the season? Has it been underwhelming?
100%. It's been so frustrating because they've dropped 11 points in the league from winning positions, and then that's kind of now transferred into the Champions League. And the most worrying thing about that is that Sunderland's strength is to keep going right until the end. And if it's 1-1, then you would bet Sunderland on getting something right at the death, and that is a big worry. Newcastle United have this issue at the moment where they cannot see games out. It's down to, on one hand, game management. We saw against Spurs, who was so open. Eddie Howe decided to bring on another centre-back, and that was the total wrong decision because it just invited Tottenham on, and Tottenham got the equaliser. So it's partly down to what the manager's doing, but also it's a mentality issue. Anthony Gordon's spoken about it. Eddie Howe has spoken about it. It's just something where they either just decide on 85 minutes to sit back. I don't think it's an instruction from Eddie Howe. It's something that's happening on the pitch where they just go into their shell and they invite the attack on, and inevitably they end up conceding. And that is a big worry going into Sunday. The other concern, Connor, is that if you speak to Newcastle United fans about the big games, and they will often say, well, actually, Newcastle United get up for the big games. They get up for Arsenal. They get up for Liverpool. They get up for Man City. They get up for Barcelona in the Champions League. And they do. And they have done this season. You mentioned Liverpool and Arsenal. They should have come away with something out of that game. They should have been at least 2-0 up against Barcelona in the first half. My concern is whether it's the spectacle that they're getting up for, or whether it's the team. And it's really hard to say that I think they will raise their game for this clash, simply because if you look at how those teams play, your Man Cities, your Arsenals, your Liverpools, your Barcelona, they have a lot of the ball, and that plays into Newcastle's hands because they can press them high, they can do high intensity, they can force them into mistakes, they can hit them on the counter with pace, and that's where Newcastle United are at the best. Are Sunderland like that? Are Sunderland going to have a lot of the ball on Sunday? And that's my other big concern, that some fans will say, oh, they'll be fine, Newcastle, because they get up for the big games. Okay, they do, But is it they get up for the big games against teams that suit their style of play, or is it they get up for spectacle? And I'm not really sure what the answer is.
In terms of home and away, when I did a bit of research yesterday, I did another video preview, and we looked at Newcastle kind of in what they are like. And if you look at their underlying data, it's largely positive. They've got good numbers, but the difference between home and away is quite stark. I mean, Newcastle are one of the best home teams in the Premier League and have been pretty much since Eddie Howe came in. They've been amazing at home. On the road, though, this season, it's fair to say they've been really quite poor at times. And I know they did get that 4-1 win against Everton. It was a bit of a weird game, that one. Pickford, I don't know, he had like a brain fart, didn't he? He was really struggling in that one. Um, what is the issue on the road for Newcastle? Do you think is it travel? Is it, not? I mean, you talk about getting up for games. I feel like Newcastle at St James's Park is such a different prospect. If this game was at St James's Park this weekend, I would be incredibly worried. I think it would be a really difficult afternoon. But because it's at the Stadium Light and Newcastle are on the road, I don't think I have as many fears. But what is the difference? Why are Newcastle so poor on the road compared to at home?
If I had the answer to that, Con, I'd be a very rich man. I don't even think Eddie Howe knows the answer, to be perfectly honest. The difference with that Everton game, obviously you had the errors from, as you say, Jordan Pickford, but Newcastle United then went for it. They didn't sit back, which they've done against the likes of West Ham and Brentford. As soon as they get a goal, it's like, oh, we'll go into our shell and we'll just invite the pressure on, and then inevitably they collapse. Everton, they went and got the second and the third and then the fourth, and that was the difference. Look, the midfield is a big issue, I feel, on the road. We've got three very, very good midfielders in Tonali, Bruno and Joelinton, often described, and I've said it myself earlier this season, as potentially the Premier League's best midfield trio. Now, Joelinton in recent weeks has fallen off a cliff. Tonali's not been the same. Bruno, though, has just gone up to another level. I mean, he's going to be the key man to watch on Sunday. But too often away from home, they've just been exploited and been bullied, been outrun. They've not been enough desire. They've not got to the second ball. And it's been so frustrating because at home, they're a total different beast. It's very hard to win the battle in the midfield at home at St James's Park against Newcastle. Whereas away, it's far too easy. And they're often pressed, they're often stepped up too high. And there's just so much space in between, in front of the defence and behind that midfield three. And that's where Newcastle United have really struggled away from home and lost games. Brighton away from home, the space they exploited was there. West Ham did it. Brentford did it. It was just far too easy. And if Sunderland can do that and can exploit that midfield, I mean, if I was Sunderland, and I mean, I don't watch a lot of you guys, and I would just drop a man in that space between the midfield and the defence and just say to Newcastle, well, come and mark us, because Bayer Leverkusen did it and Newcastle just didn't do it. And for whatever reason, that solution hasn't been found, that problem hasn't been fixed. And for me, that's been the biggest problem on the road, is just how easy the midfield is bypassed.
We've talked about a few negatives there with this Newcastle team, but what are the positive? What are the things to worry about? I mean, you mentioned Bruno being the most important player, and we talked about him quite a bit on your podcast as well, and I think he's the most important player for Newcastle. But what are the things Sunderland should be really concerned about for this game? I mean, if Newcastle play at their best, how will this game go in, and what are the areas that you expect Newcastle to do well in on the pitch?
Well, we'd like to see more from the wings. I think that's absolutely crucial. Anthony Gordon seems to be getting back to his best, so he will start on Sunday, you would think. And there's a question about who will start on the right, whether it's Harvey Barnes on the wrong side or whether he gives it to Jacob Murphy. I would probably say it'll be Jacob Murphy, because his first thought is to get the ball into the box. And if they do that, then they'll hope to have a bit of success. But the issue is Nick Valdemare is often not where he needs to be, because his natural instinct is to drop deep, which he's very good at doing. He can bring the ball down, traps it wonderfully, brings others into play. But the issue is he's then turning and he's looking to pass to him, if you get what I mean. And there's no one up top to receive the ball. Now, against Everton, the other thing they did really well was actually, for the first time this season, really, the wingers went ahead of Nick Valdemare. There was a Langer with a bit of pace, and I think it was Harvey Barnes on the other side. Yeah, because Gordon, it was Harvey Barnes. And that made the difference. For the first time this campaign, you had players running beyond Nick Voldemort. And so we need to see that. If Newcastle managed to do that on Sunday, we should have a bit of success, whether it's the wingers who need to run on or whether it's one of the midfielders. They just need someone to make sure they're ahead of Voldemort, because if you look at his average position map for the majority of games this season, he's very nearly in the centre circle on every single one of them, which shows you how deep he comes. Could they play Wissa potentially as a centre forward and Voldemort is the number 10? It would be a big, big change in formation in a massive, massive game. I think as the season goes on, we probably will see that. Probably comes too soon for Sunday. But that is the key area where I think Newcastle can have success if they deploy either a midfielder or the wingers to get ahead of Voldemort as he drops deep to bring the ball down.
What about Newcastle's defence and goalkeeper? Because I look at, they've had issues with Nick Pope, and I don't know if he's going to be fit for the weekend. Ramsdale's come in, and to be honest, I've not been massively convinced by him from what I've seen. I think he maybe could have done better for the equaliser on Wednesday night. I look at the back four, and Chiao, I think, has had a really good start of life in the Premier League. Did think he had a tough game on Wednesday, but he's done well since he's come in. And he's had Dan Burn was next to him midweek. Are you expecting that to continue? And then your fullbacks, I quite like Lewis Hall, I quite like Tino Livramento. I think you've got very good fullbacks at Newcastle. But can Sunderland exploit your defence and goalkeeper if we are to be quite aggressive on set pieces, which we are, long throws into the box? Is that an area where we can maybe get success, or do you think Newcastle are okay dealing with those sort of physical and aerial threats?
Yeah, the goalkeeper was quite an interesting one because Nick Pope deservedly came out of the side. I mean, it was helped by the fact he was injured, so Eddie Howe didn't really have to make that difficult decision. But most fans were calling for it because he had an absolute shocker against Marseille, and he's had a few, moments where it's been just absolutely baffling. And then Ramsdale's come in, great with his feet, but there have been some moments where he's absolutely flapped at it. Now, if Nick Pope's deemed fit enough to play, I think Nick Pope will start. And look, if he just stops on his line, then fine. You've obviously got to set up to accommodate the fact that when he does come out of his box, he's a danger to Newcastle United, and he can't kick for love and the money either. It just reaffirms Newcastle need to go out and buy a proper goalkeeper in the summer. But for Sunday, if Pope's fit, I think he will start. In terms of the defence, I think it's probably a good thing in many ways that Malik Chiao had a difficult afternoon or evening on Wednesday, because he's been absolutely superb. He's been brilliant to watch. He just does everything so effortlessly. What a bargain he could prove to be for, I think it was just 34, 35 million, which seems horrendous to say, but this is the day and age where that is actually a bargain in football. But I think just that kind of reminder that he is actually human might be a good thing for him as well, not to get too ahead of himself, not to get complacent in his performances. Dan Burn, I think, is a shoe-in to start alongside him. Look, his pace is an issue, but at centre-back, as long as he's disciplined, as long as he doesn't step out, as sometimes he does, ahead of the other defensive three, then he should be all right. He's good in the air. He's good with his duels. And he's got the kind of the extra desire to win this game because of his allegiances as well. I'm just thankful he won't be playing at left back, because it would be a totally different conversation. And Lewis Hall and Tino Livramento, they are absolutely brilliant. Probably going to be England's full-backs for the next decade. I've had difficult weeks in certain games over recent games. Again, maybe a little reminder isn't the worst thing, a little kick up the backside. But look, if they play to their strengths, if they are on form, then Sunderland will have a very difficult afternoon, because going forward, those two are absolutely key, and they're very good defenders as well. It's just going to be interesting to see how he deploys them against Man City. You kind of had them moving into the midfield to stop Man City playing through the centre, and you had the wingers moving back into kind of wing back positions. That worked really well. He hasn't kind of done that since, bizarrely. Obviously, it depends on the opposition you're playing, but obviously the midfield battle is going to be absolutely key. And if Sunderland want to come through the middle, we might see two full backs when Sunderland have got the ball deployed into the centre, just to kind of congest the area.
For Sunderland, we've got two options up front. We've either been playing Wilson Isidore, who's an on the shoulder kind of striker. He likes to get in behind, likes to really stretch back lines, and then we've got Brian Brobby, who is a hold up striker. He likes to sort of maybe drift a little bit deeper and get the ball and play others into the game. which is the best option from a Sunderland perspective? This is, but what is the best option? Would you rather play against a striker? Well, from the Newcastle side, would you rather have a striker that's holding the ball up and bringing others into play, or somebody that's going to stretch that back four and try and run in behind? What do you think is worse for Newcastle to defend against?
It depends on which defender is tasked with marking. And we saw on Wednesday that Chiao had a really difficult even against Patrick Schick. And when he went off, he looked better. But that's a totally different level. Patrick Schick is a fantastic striker. No disrespect to the two you've mentioned. If Malik Chiao is tasked with covering that man who's running through the channels and trying to go in behind, we should be all right. If it's kind of a long ball over the top, you would back Newcastle's defenders to win in the air. Very good in the air. Bringing others into play. One of the things that I really gets me frustrated about Newcastle United is that they tend to follow the ball rather than the man. So I think that could be the biggest danger in terms of centre forward. If they've got someone who can bring it down and hold up the ball, then what you sometimes see, and you see quite often, is that you'll have kind of 3 or 4 players just go straight to the ball. And it's like, whoa, because you've then left XYZ without a man, without a marker, and they can just run on beyond, and often the opposition exploit that. So for me, I would rather Malik Chiao have to go in a foot race with a centre forward rather than have to deal with someone holding the ball up, or the defence in general, because I think Newcastle are better suited to dealing with long balls over the top, or just dealing with that kind of man on the shoulder.
In terms of a player that you're maybe worried about from the Sunderland side, I'll give you one that every team seems to worry about. And every week, Dan Ballard is on set pieces. Every team is manhandling him. He should have had about 4 or 5 penalties. He's constantly getting pulled down. And he's been a big problem from set pieces all season for opposition teams. But is there any player that you're particularly worried about from the Sunderland side that you think, if they have a good game, it's going to be very difficult for us to compete?
I think Dan Ballard is one of the names that Newcastle fans will be talking about, simply because at the moment they can't defend set pieces. So that is just music to the ears of Dan Ballard and Sunderland fans. Whip the ball in, he's more than likely going to get an opportunity because Newcastle either switch off, they're not marking the man, or they're just too weak in the challenge. I mean, the goal they conceded against Bayer Leverkusen, the first one, Tonali's just easily wrestled off the ball, and then it hits Bruno and goes in the back of the net. But you shouldn't be switching off in that position. It's about desire and want, and you've got to make sure you get there ahead of your man. And if you can't do that, then you've got to make sure you're strong and just don't let him out-maneuver you. And it's happened too often this season. So Dan Ballard, if he's good in the air from a corner or a free kick, then that will be an issue. And then, of course, you've got Conor Xhaka in the middle, who is just... I have to be honest, when that deal was made, I questioned it. I couldn't quite believe what Sunderland were doing, because he'd fallen so far off his usual standards at Arsenal. And I just felt a return to the Premier League at his age after a couple of years in Germany was just the total wrong decision to kind of, in many ways, build your team around. But look, he shut me up. He's been absolutely brilliant. And in truth, Newcastle United lack a character like him. They lack a player like him, that kind of anchor man who just sits in front of that defence and makes sure that they are solid. And if you're going to try and get through the middle, then there's a tank waiting for you to stop you. And fair play, he's proved the critics wrong. And I do fear his influence, his experience on the game on Sunday.
How do you expect the game to go then? Are you expecting a tight affair? Do you think one team could maybe run away with it? Or, is it going to be a game settled maybe on set pieces? I mean, a lot of Sunderland games this season have been settled on set pieces, but how do you expect it to go?
I think it's going to be 1-1. I will be very nervous if Newcastle are 1-0 up going into the final 10 minutes, or if they're, whatever the scoreline is, because Newcastle United just at the death can't defend. If it's 1-1 going in the last 10 minutes, I'll be fearing that Sunderland will do what they're very good at, getting that win at the death. I think the first 15-20 minutes, we'll see challenges flying in. I think it'll get very feisty. That first challenge, whether it's from a Sunderland or Newcastle persuasion, will get cheered like it's a goal. And then it's just about settling into the game and trying to get a feel for it, trying to control it. I'm going to be intrigued to see how Sunderland set up. If Sunderland set up in a low block, fantastic for you guys. That's exactly what you should do against Newcastle, truth be told. It's then about your desire to want to win this game, because you could easily set up in a low block and see the game out in a draw. But then if you decide to take the game to Newcastle, that plays in Newcastle's hands because on the counter they are, fantastic. The high intensity, the high press. Will we see it in this game? Nick Valdemare can't really do the high press. He tries. I mean, ironically, against Leverkusen, he actually did press the keeper and they got a goal from it. But for the large part of this season, the press hasn't been there, and it's whether it'll return for this game. And that's going to be interesting. But I think it'll be 1-1. And I think for Sunderland, the best way to get a result out of this game is by being in that low block. Because I think if you're in that low block and then you're clinical going forward, but you're not gung-ho, then you'll stand a really good chance of getting victory. If you take the game to Newcastle and you allow them to absorb and then hit you on the break, that's where you could fall down.
Oh, there we go. If Reggie Slippery is listening, you've been given the game plan from Andrew Musgrove. But thanks, Andrew, for joining. Oh, I'll give my quick prediction. I said on your channel my head says 1-1, but my heart says 2-1 Sunderland. So I'll go 2-1 Sunderland. But thanks, Andrew, for coming along. As I said, the link I'll put into the description of my interview with Andrew and his channel. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you later on, maybe after the Derby game at this point. This might be the last video you watch before the Derby game kicks off, and then we'll see you after that for either lots of content next week or virtually no content next week, depending on how the result goes.